Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Tonight, we are going to be talking about reading and how to plan your literacy program to add in a little bit of differentiation and to get your students responding to reading. So one of the reasons I chose this topic for tonight's episode was I kept seeing a lot of people reevaluating what it is that they were going to be doing in their reading program. And I get asked quite a bit as to what I do. And it's one of my number one blog posts on mathlearning.com about how I plan my literacy program so I can fit everything that we need to cover in 100 minutes of instructional time. So I've talked in previous episodes about writing, so I thought today would be a great day as I'm right in the thick of getting my students to learn how to respond to reading. I thought I would share some of the things that I'm doing in my classroom, maybe give you a bit of ideas of something that you could maybe try in yours. So when I first started teaching language, there was a big push and focus on teaching the comprehension strategies like predicting, making connections, inferring, determining importance, all of those. In fact, we actually had a school-wide calendar that told us which subjects and which comprehension strategies we taught during each month. And as a new teacher, I found this really helpful because I knew what I needed to focus on, and that could be the focus of all of our reading activities. So when we were in the Making Connections month, that would be great because all of our resources and all of our focus for that time, perhaps for a 6-week schedule, would be on making connections. And that was great in terms of helping me plan. But one of the problems that always struck me was I would be reading this picture book or a read aloud novel, and I would all of a sudden get kind of inspired to point out the fact that there was an inference, point out that there was something a little bit more than perhaps making a connection. It was a great opportunity to make a prediction, or is that determining importance? Can we evaluate what the author really means? And I was always struck with, well, I want to be able to kind of cover things as they come up because most picture books are not singularly focused. They involve part of reading is using all of those comprehension strategies all together. So I kind of moved away from doing the month units of first we teach one comprehension strategy and then we move forward and teach all the other strategies in isolation to really looking at trying to teach them in 3 different phases, but we can kind of do them all together. We may focus on one over the other, but that will all depend on the book that we're reading and the opportunities that exist within that storyline. So I now don't follow that calendar. And I also use very heavily the gradual release of responsibility model. And I've talked about those numerous times that we should be following when we're teaching the gradual release where we do modeled, shared, guided, and independent. Now, this is super important when it comes to reading instruction. So when we're using modeled reading, we're showing students and modeling them for what good reading behaviors look like. So when I choose my picture books, I will often take that opportunity to share with them what I'm thinking, and I will do think alouds, and I will share what I'm learning, and I will share what I'm thinking as I read. I will ask questions and we'll come up with different ideas together. And I often will use picture books because they fit in a much smaller and more condensed time frame, especially when we're looking at the 100 minutes. I do use novels, and I will often use those as a paired text and combine those together so that we can look at a longer, more detailed storyline in a novel versus a much shorter, compact storyline in a really complex picture book. So when I'm using gradual release of responsibility, I still kind of focus on that 6-week model where the first week I'm really doing a lot of modeling. The students may try it. We'll do a lot together. Then we gradually release. So we do some shared where I release some of that control for students and they start doing things a little bit on their own, providing feedback constantly on how they're doing and what I'm expecting in terms of what their responses look like. And we're using guided instruction so that we have more small overall and focused instruction to talk about the different aspects of the book and comprehension. And it gives those students during the guided instruction really that key time to share with you what it is they were thinking about reading, and they kind of get a bit more teacher time with you to dig a bit deeper than they would in a whole class instruction. And then finally, independent, and that's where we get into that near the end of, say, a 6-week cycle, and that's when I'm pulling in the final summative assessment of whether or not they're doing something we've improved and they're making those assessment gains. So my weekly language schedule looks as follows. On Monday, I will often read a picture book, often the first half of a picture book. I like to read just the beginning where the problem is established, the characters are developed, but I definitely don't get to the resolution. I like to stop and save that and really have them think and ponder about that part of the text. Now, we are doing picture books at this point. And then on Tuesday, I will finally finish the end, and I'm finishing the story, and I'm modeling this whole time. I think alouds, I'm sharing with students, what did they think about this? And we're having those deep discussions about the text together. And I'm not assessing at this point their reading behavior. At this point, it's all oral language because they're listening to me read. They're not doing the reading themselves. They will later on, but right now, I'm modeling those comprehension strategies so that we can do this together so that they can eventually do this on a text that they read at their own independent level. On Wednesday is where we focus on a comprehension strategy. So this may change week to week, and we're focusing on different comprehension strategies depending on what that book leads to. So we might be looking at before reading strategies, during reading strategies, or after reading strategies. I've shared some of the ideas. I've kind of mapped those out for myself and look at how that's going to work for here. I'm just going to share my screen with you here. I'll go over it with you. Is before reading activities, I'm really looking at students activating their prior knowledge, asking questions, predicting, and establishing a purpose for reading. So those are really great reading strategies that we focus on before we read. While we're reading, we should be monitoring our comprehension, asking really deep questions, thick and thin questions, making connections, determining importance, inferring, summarizing and retelling, visualizing, and synthesizing. And then, of course, after reading, we're looking at the text structure, evaluating point of view, and also analyzing. So we're using all of those techniques in our classroom. So we have those things there that I just read. And that's kind of how I map out for myself what those reading strategies look like. And I kind of try to follow that of things I focus on before I read the book, while I'm reading the book, at the end of the reading, as well as after reading. So those are some of the things that I focus on there. Now on Thursday, I will do a shared reading activity. Now this is where I pull in a paired text. Now a paired text for me can be a variety of things. Sometimes it's just simply me taking the text right out of the read aloud and typing that out for students. So it could be a section. This is where I might take a section of a novel or a paragraph where students are going to read a poignant part themselves. I'm going to share that text with them. They're going to see the text in front of them. So they are actually reading. So it came from a familiar book that we have read together, but they're going to be looking at a segment of that text. So I may pull it out and retype that section for them so they can have the text in front of them and read it. I will also pair up things that might have a similar theme. And we're only looking at a 1-page reading at this point. I try not to go beyond that. I might have a theme or a similar writing style. It might be written by the same author if I can find something. I'll look at the same genre. So if we're looking specifically at a type of genre and trying to decode the different aspects of that genre, then we would pair it with something that might be from a similar genre. I might also pair it if we're looking at topic, fiction, nonfiction pair. So if the story has animals, I may focus that with animals, and I might pull that too if it's related to our science and social studies unit. And again, sometimes I'll just use excerpts. And I use this for my shared reading, and I've also used this for my guided reading instruction as well, where I'm taking parts of a text that might be similar to our main modeled read aloud, and I'm using that as a shared reading text and trying to use that to help students see that there's a connection between there. On Friday, again, we look more at comprehension and we try to dig into the text. So that's kind of my weekly schedule, is how I structure my reading half. Now, if I look at 100 minutes of literacy instruction, my reading generally takes about half of that. So that's about 50 minutes of reading instruction. And that includes both my lessons with my students as well as 20 to 25 minutes of their independent work time as well. So let me explain how I get my students to demonstrate their understanding of a text. So I have tried a few different iterations over the years about how I want students to respond to a text and share their comprehension and learning. And they've always kind of fallen back on a reading response journal. So in my reading response journal, there are 3 parts to it. The first is a retailer summary, because I want to see if they can use their understanding to tell me the most important parts. They get the gist of the story with the summary. If they're still starting, they might be just focusing on a retell where they're just telling you some of the important parts in the correct order. Depends on their skill and where they are. I always start with a retell and then move into a summary and try to make those shorter and shorter, and use the gist strategy and the somebody wanted but so then strategy for summarizing. So they do that first as their first section of their reading response journal. The second section of their reading response journal is what I call the dig deep or dig in section. In this section of the response journal, we're going deep to the text. We're not necessarily going into the meaning and the connections and the inferences, but we are going into things like author's purpose. We're looking at what it is that their word choice, what they meant, whether the illustrations match. We're really looking at the analysis, and we can see it happening in the text. So what did the author mean by using this word? So we just read the 2 stories, 1 and 0 by Catherine Atoshi, which are amazing books in our classroom. And she often uses words that have multiple meanings because of who she's picked as characters, because she has numbers and colors as her characters. And there's often double meanings with the words she chooses, such as the sentence, everyone counts. So we read that book, and the question I had my students really look at is, what does the author mean by counts? Does she use it in multiple ways? And having them understand that pivotal part in the story, they can see that sentence, they understand that there's numbers, we talked a little bit about it, but having them understand that that is a key point, it does help them again lead to what that main message is, which is what you really want them to connect to later on. So again, the first section is a summary and retell for them to determine importance. The second section is a dig deep section where they're really looking at the author's craft, they're analyzing and evaluating the components of the text. You may have them evaluate whether or not that story follows a pattern that fits that into a specific genre as well, where you're really having them look at analyzing that text features. And I find that having them do that also helps them make those deeper connections, so that they're not just connecting to things like, I have a shoe, he has a shoe, but they're connecting to more of the meaning and the moral and the lesson that might exist in that story. And finally, I have the final component is using a connect and reflect section, where I do want them to make connections and inference using visualization and perhaps making predictions to move forward with this. So they're going to reflect and connect just in a simple paragraph explaining one thing that they've connected to. Now, because I do definitely focus on inquiry, and this is the Teaching with Inquiry podcast and episode show, then I always like to provide student choice and voice in my classroom. So the option for students is I generally don't just give one question. I give 3 to or more questions that students can then choose what they're going to dig deep about, because they might not have something to say for question number 1. I can also scaffold those questions to vary the degree of difficulty, whether some of them are more simple and basic and reflect where my students are, and some of them might be a bit more advanced, and I can talk to my students that might need to choose some or the other as to which ones they should narrow their choices to. So I like to provide multiple questions for both the dig deep and the reflect and connect, where students have an option of what it is that they're going to respond to. And that allows me for a bit more buy-in for my students, because they have a bit more freedom of choice. And if there is one question that they might not be able to connect to, then they can go ahead and choose a different one. Then perhaps with that more choice they can. And sometimes you do have students that might come up with something else that they might want to dig deep and really look at, and that's okay too. So to look at what that looks like, let me see if I can find it in this file here for you. And this is all available as a bonus actually in my, so there's my weekly schedule again with reading. This is actually included as a bonus right now in the Ignited Writing section, which is really my entire language program written down for you as best that I could. And I will find it for you, but it's in there. So these are some of the other ones. So it's in there. I will put the pictures in the comments section of this video so that you can see what I am referring to when I talk about what the reader's response looks like. Now, I do have ones where the student can, oh my, I'm not sure why that is showing, but I do have one where the students can respond to on a piece of paper that I photocopy, but it's also just as simple to give them a notebook. And if you're on a paper diet at your school, then you could probably just do it just in a notebook. So they can simply just write their questions and answer in a notebook as opposed to always using a printable page like that. So that is how I set up some of my language program. Hopefully you got a better understanding of how that works in my classroom. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I will be around tonight answering any questions that you might have about how to structure the reading component of your 100 minutes of reading in your literacy block. So that is it for me tonight. If you want to get more information on tonight's episode, please check out www.teachingwithinquiry.com. Tonight's episode is actually episode 40. So all of the links to the podcast replay, YouTube show, blog post, and the transcript for tonight's video can be found there. Just search www.teachingwithinquiry.com/EP40 and you'll get all of the information that goes with this, as well as any of the links and the photos of some of the pages that I was referencing in tonight's show. So I will see you all again next week, Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as we dig in and talk a little bit more about teaching with inquiry in your classroom. Have a great week. Have a happy Valentine's Day, 100th day of school, and all of the other fun that's happening this week. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.